My name is Dan Couvrette. I'm the publisher of Divorce Magazine, and I want to welcome our listeners to this Divorce School podcast. I'm talking today to Dylan Couvrette and Elliott Meyer. For full disclosure, Dylan is my son, and Elliott is not my son, but his mother is the editor of our website, Divorced Mums. So we've got a lot of divorce experience here on the phone. Just to give you a bit of my background, I started Divorce Magazine 20 years ago, and we've been providing information and resources for divorcing people since then. I'm an expert in divorce only by my work that I've done in building and developing Divorce Magazine and divorcemagazine.com. I'm not a therapist by trade. I'm not a lawyer by trade. And neither are Dylan or Elliott. Elliott is an assessment data specialist who resides in Nashville, Tennessee. He and his wife, Emily, enjoy traveling, concerts, family, and just got settled into their first new home. Elliott is 31 years old, and his parents divorced when he was 14 years old. And he was raised from that point on pretty much by his mom, and he's had his ups and downs with his dad since their divorce. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, and he'll share information about that. Dylan is 25 years old, and as I mentioned, he's my son. He's a property manager in Toronto, and my former wife and I, his mom, divorced when Dylan was 4 years old. So we're going to talk about what they can remember about their parents' divorce, how it may have affected their lives. They may even share a bit about divorce and how it affected their friends around them, their relationships. But we'll keep in mind that Dylan, his mom and dad, they divorced 21 years ago, so he may not remember every detail. But that may also be important to you, as well as Elliott. His parents divorced 17 years ago. That may also be important to you if you're listening in on this seminar, because if you're a child of divorce, you may get some insight into, what could possibly affect you as your parents are going through divorce or if they've been divorced. If you're a divorcing person and you're wondering, well, what are the effects going to be on my children? Not like we're covering every possible example of how divorce affects children, but you might get a sense from listening to Dylan, listening to Elliott, as to what the effects that they felt back then and what the effects that they may have felt or don't feel as adults of divorce. So I want to welcome both of you to this seminar, and I appreciate that you're both taking it time. I know probably people calling in or listening into this are thinking, gee, three guys talking about feelings, emotions, and divorce, that's something new. They'd more likely be talking about a football game or a hockey game or something. So thank you guys for taking the time to be part of this conversation.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, no problem.
So I'm going to throw out a few questions and see if any of them resonate. So just jump in if some of this is something you want to comment on. So Elliott, you were a little bit older when you were 12. How old were you when your parents?
14.
14, sorry. Yeah, 14. Do you have any, and Dylan, you can jump in as well if you have something to add, but you were only 4 at the time. Do you have any recollection of, what that time was like for you and, what your experience was, what your feelings were? Do you have any recollection of it?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, a lot of it is more vague impressions than actual details, but it was, I guess, obviously to be expected. It was very tumultuous, and there was a lot of anger and confusion and mistrust, I guess, to a certain extent. It was, kind of chaotic, especially with my parents had kind of an acrimonious custody battle, so that just kind of complicates things, obviously.
Right. So you do remember, like, the feelings of tension and a bit of anxiety for yourself, or a lot of anxiety for yourself as they were going through the divorce? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So it wasn't something that you get away from. Did you feel that your parents tried to shelter you in any way while they were going through that process?
Yeah, I think they did as well as they could, but and this is something I guess I've realized more in retrospect than I understood at the time, but yeah, they're just people going through stuff too, like they're they were doing the best they could, I guess, to a certain extent. But, you know, however much you might try to shield somebody or protect somebody you care about, there's really only a certain extent to which you can do that, you know.
Right.
Especially in a situation like that that's so chaotic.
Right, right. And Dylan, we spoke earlier about this, and you said that you didn't really have any recollection of your mom and I divorcing. You were 4 years old. Do you know when you had the first sense that, hey, my parents don't live together, or did that never kind of come up for you in your experience?
I think, well, obviously when I was 4 years old, it didn't really dawn on me that that was happening. I think later in life, it kind of all just seemed to be the norm, going to your house for, 3 or 4 days and then traveling over to my mom's for the weekend or however we worked it out. Really, in my mind, there never really seemed to be a whole lot of negativity between the two of you. I'm sure there was because you were, divorced. Whenever people get divorced, obviously there's normally is going to be a negative experience, but in terms of mine, I don't remember it being negative, and I definitely had some questions when I became more of an adult, I suppose when I was 10, 11, or 12, but that's about all I can remember, really. It was just kind of the norm. Growing up, 4 years old, you kind of just, you grow up in that, and that's just normal for you, so that's where I was at.
Did either of you guys ever wonder, why did my parents get a divorce, or why are they divorcing? Or did you not have to wonder that, Elliott, because you could see what was going on? Or
that was part of it, being old enough to be aware of what's happening to an extent that I can understand things. But I think there was also kind of, for me, there was a good measure of the, self-indulgent adolescent, why is this happening to me attitude, right? Mm-hmm. So I might have been a little too caught up in my own tribulation. Yeah, right. to really be that empathetic at the time.
Right. Yeah, that's understandable. You were 14 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to figure out your own life, and plus your parents threw this at you as well, so makes it extra challenging. You're already potentially being rebellious, and did it set you more off in that direction, do you think? Were you rebellious? I don't know.
I was never really rebellious, in that kind of sense. I think I was always more, or especially at that time, had more of a tendency towards the depressive and anxious kind of end of the spectrum than rebelliousness. I was never one to act out, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Did either of you guys talk to anybody about your parents' divorce? And when you were young, when you were teenagers, when you were adults, did you ever have a conversation and say, gee, I noticed this about their divorce, or I wonder why they didn't do this, or gee, that's different than your parents' divorce if you compare it to other friends that you might have whose parents divorced? Did you ever have those conversations?
I think after the fact, or ever since then, my family has always been very open about it, and not to mention the fact that at the time, in the middle of the custody battle and everything, there were some court-ordered therapy for myself and my little brother. My little brother was 7 when my parents split, and so there was some of that, but it was more of, or it has become more of just a standard kind of topic of discussion with my family. For my little brother and myself, we've spent more of our lives as children of divorce than we did before, so it's more the norm, I guess.
Did you feel you had to protect your brother in any way, given that he was younger than you were? Or were you too caught up in yourself?
I don't really know. I remember being angry on his behalf, but I guess I don't really remember knowing how I might go about protecting him.
Right.
Because he was closer to my father than I was. They had a stronger relationship, and especially him being so young, young enough to not really understand what was going on, but old enough to be more aware, I guess, than you would have been, Dylan. At 4, you're still kind of before the age of reason, right? But at 7, I feel like was kind of that perfect storm of perception and awareness, but a lack of understanding. And I think it was a lot harder on him than it was for me. So I remember having a lot of anger on his behalf, but not really understanding how I might or what I could do for him.
Dylan, do you have any sense that your older brother, Misha, who, when we divorced, you were 4 and Misha was 9, do you have any sense of the relationship changing, or did you ever think of him as being your kind of protector, or did you have any of that feeling?
Trying to remember back to that time is difficult. I remember him struggling with maybe the dynamic between having to go from one place to the other and living in 2 places. And I do remember him having issues but that could have just been him, coming into his own as a teenager. I think, like you said, that's a difficult time as is, without having to be thrown into the mix of a divorce. Right. But in terms of talking to someone, I remember, both you and Mom being very good at explaining to me what was going on, and explaining that, 2 people who love each other aren't necessarily going to be together forever, and that's something that happens. And I think from that experience, I just kind of took that with me and just kind of was forced to understand, because I was so young, and I just kind of grew up with that. So I don't really remember talking to anybody other than you guys about the experience, and any kids who were going through a divorce themselves. I don't really remember talking to them either as a child. So yeah, it was always just, you guys were good at explaining what the situation was, and I think I just kind of trusted you guys, and that was it.
Well, I do remember your older brother, when the very early stages of your mother and I separating, that he, even at 9 years old, he did kind of take on it kind of looked to me like and sounded like he was taking on more of an older brother, I'm going to take care of you role. Mm-hmm. Now, that may not be something that you remember, but not that you guys stopped fighting. Heaven forbid, that never happened.
Well, I think that's the reason that I don't remember that older brother. It was more or less, we were always kind of, or rather he was at my throat and I was trying to defend myself type thing. So maybe that's what's clouding my mind. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, as you said, you were young, and when somebody's beating on you in the kitchen or in the living room or any room for that matter, it's kind of hard to think of that as being somebody who's protecting you. But
a protector,
I do remember that sense. And just so people are listening, Dylan only has one sibling. Do you only have one sibling, Elliott, or are there others?
Yes, it's just the 2 of us.
Right. Was there anything that, Elliott, that you can think of that your parents did that helped in any way as they were going through their divorce?
Like I said, it's the whole situation is kind of a jumble of impressions. It's difficult to recall specific details. Yeah.
Did you ever think, either of you guys, no, it's not a problem. This may be useful for people who are listening, because not everything is significant in their parents' divorce. And so, I guess if I were a therapist, I might say, well, some of these things you may have suppressed and they'll come out later in your life. But it sounds like I know Dylan's life pretty well, and he's got a pretty good life. He's got a great girlfriend. He's got great relationships with friends. He's happy in his job, and so his life's turned out. And Elliott, it sounds like you're doing okay as well. You've married and new home, and you don't sound depressed to me, and thinking I'll never get married. Obviously not. You've gone ahead and gotten married yourself.
No, I'm doing quite well.
Yeah. Did you have any reservations about getting married? Did you think, gee, my parents did such a bad job. Do I really want to get into this? Did that conversation come up a lot, or not at all?
No, I think that was something that I had decided that, it's the kind of thing you can't let make you afraid to do something that you want to do. You can't wake up in the morning and say, I'm afraid to drive down the street because I might get in a car wreck. I'm not gonna let that keep me from where I'm going. And especially Emily, we've just now been married. Let's see, a couple of weeks from now will be our first anniversary, and it was just such a natural feeling. Like, we both kind of knew several months into dating, we started talking about it, that it was just kind of a foregone conclusion. So I think the idea of the kind of fear of like, oh, well, my parents divorced, and my parents divorced in a hugely disruptive and destructive way. Like, I'm not going to let that keep me from doing something that feels like what I should do.
Right. Dylan, do you think you will ever get married? I've never asked you this question before, so great time to do it on a seminar, right?
Hard question to ask, or rather answer.
The question's easy to ask. It may be a hard question to answer for you. I don't know. You can say next question if you want. We can move on, or you can give me an answer.
That's fine. I'm good to answer the question. I guess the answer is I don't know. It hasn't crossed my mind at this point, and I don't think that I would be stopped by the fact that, I'm a product of divorced parents. I think that's pretty common these days, so I don't think that it would take, having parents who have been divorced to stop you from marriage, because a lot of people get divorced these days. So I don't know the answer to that question, really. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, I'm not scared of getting married because I'll get divorced. I think it's a matter of the right person, the right time, and that's it.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a good answer. That's so there's still possibilities for you.
Yes.
All right. Well, fellas, I want to thank you for your time. Is there anything you want to share that we didn't talk about that you think would be helpful to either children whose parents are going through a divorce, or for parents who are going through a divorce and are wondering what the effects might be on their children? Dead silence.
Yeah, nothing that I can think of.
No? Okay. Well, I know
I actually have something to add. I think it's important for the children who are going through it to not make it about themselves. I think that's important to remember, that the people who are getting divorced are getting divorced because they have an issue with that other person. And when you take it personal, then that's when it starts to become more difficult to go forward.
Right. So it's not the kid's fault. Every parent normally says that to the children, but what you're saying as a child of divorce is it's really not their fault. Their parents have to figure stuff out, and
that's right.
And because that's a tremendous burden that a lot of children carry, because they think that somehow they're the reason for their parents divorcing. Which I've never met a case of divorce where the children were at fault. So that's a great point to make. So for the people who are listening to this seminar, I recommend that you check out some of the other Divorce School podcasts, and there's also videos that you can watch. And I also recommend that you visit divorcemag.com and divorcemoms.com, two great websites with just tons and tons of information and resources. I hope that this seminar has been of value to you, and I want to thank Elliott and Dylan again for sharing their insights and spending this time with me. Thanks so much, fellas.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks for having us.